Hey guys, could you hear me? Hey Agnes, hey Todd. Could you hear me? Hey guys, thanks for joining. Could you hear me? Hey Agnes, hey Todd, could you hear me? Sweet. Thanks for joining. We're just gonna give people a few minutes to join. Hey Paul, see you've joined. Paul,
Yo,
how you doing, boss?
I'm all right, man. How are you?
We're testing out the platform for the first time, and I wasn't sure how it was gonna go down, but I see it worked okay.
First time on live, so happy to be on
Yeah,
on the call and on the conversation.
excited about today, man. The hair. I see the hair is growing out.
Hey, COVID time, COVID time. My,
COVID
my
time.
barber's been closed since November at least, so it's been a minute, uh,
Yeah.
and I'm not finding a new barber, so we have to wait till they open back up.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Hey, Yomi. I see you're on too, and I see Simone's joined us. I'll pop her up on screen here.
Hi guys.
Hey, Simone.
Someone, that's
How you
How
good.
are you
doing?
guys doing? Good. How are you guys?
All right.
Doing well. Doing well.
Good.
Yes. 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 Why is it that I'm so close and everybody else is so perfectly framed?
So Simone does this on the regular, so
So she has it all set up.
I got my little setup here for sure.
That's awesome. I was just trying to kind of figure out how I get my space to work and be perfectly framed like Simone is in her camera.
yeah, man, I need some art on the wall.
Yeah. So just gonna kind of chit chat and give it a few for others to join. So one of the things that I love to do when I talk to my team, I like to break the ice by asking a simple question around. So maybe I'll start with you, Simone. So Simone, what's the best thing that's happened to you today?
Oh, warm weather, 100%.
That's sweet. And I
Yeah.
hope you had a chance to get out because I see the warm weather, but I'm just looking at it from the window.
Yes, I did get a chance to get out, which is really nice. I'm
Uh,
thankful for that.
that's awesome. And Paul, how about you?
I got some work done today and the sun is shining. Can't ask for more than
All right, all right. That's good. I like to kind of keep it short and simple. Right?
And what about you?
Best thing that happened today is we're doing this. I got Instagram Live to work, and
that.
that's the first time. So that's big things.
There you go.
So hey, I mean, for everybody else that's joined us, what's the best thing that's happened to you? Drop it in the comments so we could discuss amongst ourselves. don't see anyone dropping anything in the comments. But Simone, how's the weather out in Calgary?
Good. Heat wave is coming, so it's been 30 plus for the last day or so. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely sweating a little bit, but can't complain. I prefer it over snow. I need it.
The cold, because
Yeah.
I know it could get kind of crazy cold out there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Agnes says I'm ready for a big deployment today, so she's pumped. That's the best thing, and then I think like I'm seeing Naomi saying, "Hey, I'm with you, Simone. All about the weather."
Yes,
It's awesome.
absolutely.
Isn't that amazing? What the weather does for your psyche. Like it puts you in
Mm-hmm.
like a different plane of operation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Simone, is
Absolutely.
there something from a psychological perspective that you could speak to around what the weather does for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely we all need vitamin D. We all need the sunlight in general in order for optimal brain function. But I think that some definitely get influenced by the weather a little bit more than others. Like there's definitely seasonal depression or sad disorder that can come out, especially during the times where it's darker and there's not as much sunlight. So it definitely can cause a dip in mood and a little bit of depression symptoms as well.
That's great. That's great. I think we lost Paul here. So we'll get him up back on screen and then we get rolling in a little bit. So let's get talking. Hello everyone. Name is David Griffiths. I think a lot of you or most of you know me. I'm the president and founder of Brothers Who Care. And wherever you are, I don't know if it's out west, a couple hours behind, or you may be in another country. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to our first mental health hour. So just over a month ago, we did this talk on mental health, and Brothers Who Care as an organization, what we try to do is we believe in the power of the collective. So we bring people together and we encourage them to pool their resources and make an impact. And those resources are both from an opinion standpoint, from a money resource standpoint, but also from a standpoint as speaking as a collective. And when we did that, just over a month or so ago, we made a big impact. We had a few organizations that we were profiling doing mental health, and we had a pitch where members from the community presented those organizations for nomination. And, Taigo was an organization that won, and we donated over $3,200 to Taigo. But one of the great things that kind of came out of this discussion is that the community, the members were saying, hey, like we need to have these discussions on an ongoing basis. And part of that is really talking about mental health from a Black male perspective. So you asked for it and we delivered. And what we are delivering is what we're calling the Mental Health Hour. It's something that we're going to run every month. And we're going to have a conversation about mental health and specifically how it relates to the Black male perspective. And when we talk about Brothers Who Care, like I think one of the things that I want to ensure that everybody understands is that it's about brothers and it's about everything in our space that we care about, right? So it's about our family, it's about our community, it's about special persons, women in our lives. It's about our children. It's about caring for each other and being open to have conversations with each other about the things that matter. And also being brave enough to have the conversations that we don't normally have because it's been looked down on in, the not so great way. So, there's a stat that says 1 in 5 Canadians at some point in time in their life will be challenged by some sort of a mental health situation. And it's difficult when you think about it because of the stigma that's associated with mental health across the broader population, but more specifically in the Black community. But then even more specifically as it relates to Black male, like we've been grown to say, hey, you need to be tough. You need to kind of hold in your emotions. You don't express it enough. And our life experience or lived experiences kind of reinforce that, right? When you fall down and you cut your knee, you don't cry, right? And it's kind of being reinforced. Like you hear our parents, grandparents, and just culture in general will say, boys don't cry, right? And so there's that kind of stigma that we've got to live with from a social perspective. And there is a stigma that we need to live with just from, a perspective around the challenges around definition of mental health and whether or not it is something that we actually need to be worried about. So, so we're going to have these conversations, and I'm really happy to have Simone and Paul to kick us off. Simone, I was just intrigued by some of the posts that you were doing on IG, and kind of reached out. I think you're just making a great impact. Simone is a master's level registered social worker and therapist in Calgary, Alberta, like Calgary. My sister went out to school in Calgary and lives in Edmonton now, and I think I see my brother-in-law is on from Edmonton representing. So, saying hi to Todd out there. And Simone runs, she's the founder of Cognitive Corner. It's a trauma-informed and culturally responsive psychological practice, which aims to provide both psychological services and psychoeducation with the hopes to contribute to the destigmatization of accessing mental health. So Simone, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you?
Yeah, and thank you for the introduction so far. So as David said, my name is Simone, and many of you might know me behind the social media account of the Cognitive Corner. And so that's something that I started in December of 2019. And initially it was just a social media account, and it's grown into a full-blown practice, which has been an amazing journey. And so now I'm just working mostly on building my practice and contributing to destigmatizing mental health services, especially in racialized communities, because I think that that's something that's definitely needed to address mental health issues in racialized, especially Black communities.
That's awesome, Simone. We're excited to have you. Excited to be in the circle, and in that spirit of continuing to sort of build connections and spread our wings. It's great to make that connection with you. And then we have Paul. Paul is a strategist, an urban planner, and the executive director for Black Health Alliance. And I met Paul when we did our initial fundraiser about a month and a half ago. And Paul's just been great. I'm impressed by his presence, and his command. He spent the last decade designing interventions focused on health and well-being. So not just mental health, but looking at, Paul, we've kind of talked about what are some of the offshoots for that, community violence, addiction, the social service sector, and the overpopulation that we see within that. And your work is currently focused on social planning and health equity. So Paul, welcome. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about you?
I mean, you gave it all already. I think what I'll say is that I am the executive director of the Black Health Alliance, and the Black Health Alliance primarily operates in Toronto and in Southern Ontario. But sometimes it's hard to describe what we do. But if I were to summarize it into one sentence, it's basically trying to increase access and remove barriers to the supports, the resources, the tools that people need to be healthy. So, our work is right now, obviously focused on the Black communities, a lot on mental health at the moment, and a lot on Black youth in particular. What we're trying to do is to make sure that, particularly in the time that we're in, Black youth, children and families have the supports they need to be mentally well. So just a lot of projects, a lot of conversations, a lot of advocacy is kind of where is the space that we operate in.
Love that, and love that both of you, when we talk, whether the conversations are private or now, you definitely sense the passion in which you're kind of operating within your space. So I'm really excited to kind of jump into the conversation. And we posted on Instagram a quote from Taraji P. Henson, where she kind of said, hey, be mindful that everyone is facing something, even if you don't see it. And we posted this on IG, and it's such a simple statement, but it's so telling. So Simone, when you hear this statement, what does this mean to the Black male?
Yeah, immediately when I hear that statement, I kind of just think of society in general first, of how, when you ask someone how they're doing, typically the anticipated response is, I'm good, I'm great, how are you? And we don't really prepare for people to say, hey, I'm actually not doing so well. And that's part of the stigma of mental health, and even more so in the Black community and with Black males, because there's this perception that Black men have to be this strong Black men and nothing, they're not affected by anything or anything like that. And that's not the case. And I think that the Black community in general has, as a coping mechanism or survival strategies, has been able to maybe mask things that have impacted them a lot easier than maybe other people or other communities. And so I think that when you see someone and you may characterize them as someone who's really resilient or really strong, or someone who looks happy all the time and doesn't really worry, I think that we have to just really be mindful that everybody goes through emotions, and the fluctuations of emotions is really normal and should be normalized. And as humans, we're not meant to be happy all the time. We're meant to experience the waves of different emotions.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And, maybe Paul, you want to kind of pick up on that, because, Simone talked about the whole masking aspect of it, right? So why do you think us as Black men kind of mask these emotions?
I think you talked about it in the beginning, and I can only speak from my own personal experience. I think, there are so many things that threaten the mental health of Black men. You can talk about, life factors. We're in the context of COVID, where a lot of folks have lost their job, don't know where the next dollar is coming from, whether it is to feed your family or to keep yourself housed. The day-to-day interactions with, things like the police and, all of those kinds of conversations. And then just the day-to-day interactions, maybe with, people that you work with, or, when you're taking, you're in public and, certain interactions, racism that you may face, in that. And I think we're taught to kind of, as you said, kind of, have a strong face, stay strong in the face of all of those things. And it's not really safe, actually, sometimes to open up yourself to that kind of vulnerability, to say, yeah, I'm going through something, or I'm feeling this kind of way. And so, because we haven't really had those conversations, a lot of folks don't have the tools to really process, all of what's happening and going on. So the only thing that you can try and do is put up that mask, if that makes sense, to try and preserve the little bit of grounding that you might have.
Mm. It's kind of interesting you say that, because as you talk about it, it sounds like it's an illness, right? And so, when somebody, breaks a toe or breaks a hand, or, has cancer, or, kidney stones, you don't hear somebody say, hey, mask it and don't show those emotions. So why do you think that mental health may not necessarily be seen as an illness, and it's kind of seen as like a demon in a lot of different ways?
That's a me question.
You are Simone.
Perhaps I would say, you know, there's a spectrum to the distress that people would face, you know, as it relates to their mental health. You know, and so like here in Toronto, CAMH is famous for saying mental health is health, and getting folks to try and just understand that simple concept that, you know, your mental well-being is part of your health. I think part of the reason why uh, people don't identify it as something that, you know, needs tools or people need support is because, you know, for a lot of folks, like it's kind of unknown. It's unknown territory. Even though you said 1 in 5 Canadians will face, you know, that issue, but you know, I think it's important that folks know that, you know, a ton of folks are going through the same, you know, issues on a range, obviously on a range that you know you may be facing, and I think it's, you know, to a certain extent, we think about it as like a personal failing when, you know, it's not that. I think as Simone was saying, there are a ton of life circumstances and fluctuations in you know, emotions and you know, well-being that people are going to go through. It's, you know, are we giving people the tools and the things that they need to work through that? And so like I believe mental health is health, and it's not a personal failing, and that, you know, these things are part and parcel of you know, living life.
Mm, that's
I would
great.
just
I
like
mean, I
to,
love that response. So, Simone, you wanna weigh in on that?
yeah, I just wanted to add in that I think another part of that is the fact that it's invisible to most people, right? And so when you break a leg, when you break an arm, people can see you're in a cast or whatever. And they can see like, oh, you can't walk, that hurts, right? But when someone says, oh, I'm struggling with depression, oh, everyone's a little bit sad sometimes, right? Oh, I'm struggling with anxiety. Oh, I feel nervous sometimes too, right? And so a lot of people don't understand the gravity that mental health plays on your day-to-day life. And when you are struggling with depression or anxiety or any other mental health problem, then it can be really hard to get out of bed every day. It can be really hard to do what a lot of people might think are small things every day. And so I think that oftentimes mental health problems are oversimplified, and the strategies that people, you know, assume might help, like, okay, just, you know, set an alarm for yourself, just, you know, make a morning routine, just be more disciplined. It's not as easy as that. And I think the mental battles are a lot harder for people to recognize and validate than it is when they can see someone's in a cast, or they can see someone just went through surgery or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. You know, and you know, when you make that correlation between what you see and you cannot see, it kind of really resonates, right? I know that within your practice, you kind of focus around demystifying the stigma, right? That's associated with mental health. So let's talk about why there is a stigma. You know, how might we start to break down that stigma as a community?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a lot of it goes back to, as a society, what we think people should be like. And I think as humans, we love to put people in boxes. We love to understand things. And so by understanding things, we categorize people. So if we feel like someone who typically is happy and typically is all of these things, then they can't be depressed. They can't have anxiety. They can't have mental illness or anything like that. And so I think there's a lot of stigma, not only because of the invisibility of it, but also because a lot of the people struggling, you might not know that they were struggling, or might not seem like they would be people who struggle.
Mm. It's interesting, you know, as you're kind of speaking, I saw some of the comments that came in that says that stigma is directly tied to stereotypes, right? And so, you know, if you think about the stigma that we face, like if we say stigma equates to stereotype, then if we're living under that stigma, then we're going to sort of project certain energies that impact and move to people that are around us. So in the spirit of talking about COVID, right, and the stigma on our children, how do you map that relationship between stigma stereotype and how that gets passed on to our children and how they're expected to behave.
Yeah. So when I think of stereotype, especially in the Black community, I think of that perception of strong and that perception of resilient. And so when we think of Black people as strong and resilient, then naturally it doesn't fit for someone who is supposed to be strong and resilient to be also struggling with maybe depression or loneliness or anxiety or whatever the case is. And so we often, I think that the common categorization of people in the Black community is that they're stronger than other people in the sense of like, you shouldn't be struggling with this. You shouldn't be struggling with your mental health or anything like that because you're strong, because you're supposed to be the leader of the family or whatever the case is.
Great. Paul, anything you want to add to that?
As you guys are talking, I was thinking about the piece around stigma and what my thoughts were on that. I think, to a certain extent, there's a stigma across like all kinds of health issues or concerns, right? Like I often use the example of cancer. Like when that's happening in parts of my family, it's like a very kind of hush conversation until like the very last moment. And then you're like, yo, but why did nobody say anything? And I think to a certain extent, there's a piece there that, some of these things are looked at as like failings or flaws, and folks don't necessarily know how to sometimes have these conversations and work through these kinds of conversations. And then, I think on the mental health front, there is obviously like a hyper stigma there, because again, it's like, cancer, we know, chemo, broken leg, we know, XYZ. I think we don't understand sometimes all of what the spectrum of mental health might be, or mental health distress might be, and how people are getting support and working through some of those kinds of issues. So I think to a certain extent, it's about like the spaces that we need to create to have the conversation, right? On the stigma front. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, as you were talking and you were kind of saying in your family, if somebody has cancer, it's like you don't know to the last minute. And I think when I talk to a lot of Black families, especially even my family, I think any sort of I am not well conversation tends to wait until the last minute, right? It has anything to kind of do with wellness. Do you think, and Simone, I don't know if you would have sort of a clinical point of view on this, but do you think sort of this perception of I have to always be well has some sort of clinical ties from a racial standpoint and mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think that from my perspective, when I hear that I always have to be well, I think there's a lot of ties from my perspective. I think that, first of all, capitalism, we always have to be well in order to do our job or whatever the case is. And I think, kind of as Paul said too, a lot of times any struggles that are happening are kept within the family, and they might be seen as personal failings. And so you don't want to reflect badly on not only yourself, but maybe your family. And so I think that there's a lot of pressure from all different ends of society to consistently be well.
Yeah.
Paul, back to what you're saying, kind of the second half of that question, just around like, what does this mean in the, the how stigma connects to yourself and then perhaps to young people. I think the way that I think about it, so much of what we do and how we live really actually takes a village, right? And so, when you might be in your house, you might be a parent, you might be, going through your own different kinds of struggles, and sometimes you not having the tools to process that can, one of my brethren, Asante Hanton, who is kind of also in this space, talked about like the instability that sometimes the distress that you're going through might create for the young people in your life. And so I think sometimes we can get caught up in a cycle of instability and distress, because we're not actually having the conversation, because we're not reaching outside of the family for the supports and tools that we need. You know, there's a side conversation to be had there around like what tools and supports actually exist and are accessible. But you know, perhaps that's another question. But I do think, you know, the thinking about it as community or thinking about it as an ecosystem, it's not really just one person, right? There's kind of like ripples or layers to, you know, the issues around you know, mental health distress that people are facing.
Yeah, you know, it's really incredible that you're kind of saying that and making that connection. You know, for me, when I hear you talk about the fact that mental health kind of plays through in these different ways, and I know you mentioned the tool. Dealing with it without the tools means you're not dealing with it, right? And I think when we were having a conversation and we wanted to kind of focus on, so how does this play out into the ones that are close to us in our lives? You know, you made the statement around our children are only as well as we are, right? So then how do we start to recognize that we need help and what tools are available to us to get help so that it doesn't proliferate with our children?
Sounds like a you question, Simone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from my perspective, the way that I see it is that if you think of yourself when you are regulated, meaning that you can handle life stressors, what might be different from that? So are you noticing that you're starting to sleep more, and is that impacting your day-to-day life? Are you noticing that you're starting to feel a little bit more anxious, and is that impacting your day-to-day life? So I would say any sort of symptoms or feelings that come up that are starting to impact your life more than they were before. And so that's kind of a sign to look out for, that, hey, things might not be going as well as I think that they are. And so if you're noticing that, you know, you're getting more physically tired, or you're more anxious, or you're more quick to anger, whatever the case is, and that's a sign that, like, hey, something might be off here and I need to take a look at what's going on in order to figure out where I might need some more support.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The thing that I'd add to that is, you know, I've been talking to folks a lot about the toolbox that the tools go in, if you will, and how you're building up the toolbox. And granted, I don't have all the answers, but one of the critical things I think is important is that we're actually preparing our support system before we have, you know, in distress, so that we are connected to someone who that we're close with, that we can talk to, that can actually see, you know, sometimes, you know, we might be going through things and not even actually recognize or see that we're going through things. But if you are close to somebody, you have somebody that's a trusted friend, or, you know, that you can reach out to, they can actually see and flag it for you. It's one of those tools that you know, helps to keep you grounded. I think, you know, Simone was talking about you recognizing when symptoms are happening. So I think it's important that folks kind of understand what their, you know, for the lack of a better word, like what their baseline is, like how am I normally, how am I feeling, and being in touch and in tune with that, so that you can actually, you know, be better prepared to recognize when something's happening, and then, you know, reach out and ask for that support. You know, I think oftentimes the way that I think about it actually is like, if we don't have mental health, that there's a, you know, it's a lot of things, almost everything becomes harder. So it's like critical that, you know, that first part of the toolbox, that support system is built and in place to support you when needed.
Mm.
And just to add to that also, I think a support system not only for yourself, but the whole family, because when I think of resiliency and resiliency within the family and individually, I think that it's really important that, for example, children have their own friend group and their own peer support group and other adults that they feel safe and trust, so that, you know, if a situation happens where, you know, mom and dad might not be able to help regulate you because maybe they are going through something as well, there's other safe people that the child feels good enough to go to.
Okay, great. So when I hear about tools, right, I kind of think about tools in three different categories. I think about tools from a personal coping strategy. This is what I could do, right? And so, you know, like I know that when I'm kind of hitting for that point, I could like go for a run or something. Then I kind of think about my social network, my immediate network around who I could kind of share experiences or draw for support on. And then the third box that I kind of think about is medical support, right? You know, so maybe you could think about those kind of three toolkits, for example, and then talk to us, you know, for all the Black males that are on, the Black women that are on, how they could pass on some of these tools so that we start to be better.
Yeah, I definitely think that, like you said, there's a lot of toolkits that you need. And when I think of self-care, I think of not only, you know, physical, mental, emotional, psychological, all of those things. So as Paul said, having support systems, so relational, or going for a run, or whatever the case might be.
Okay, great. And Paul, I'm gonna like pick your brain just in terms of access to services, right? I'd love for you to provide a perspective on that.
The you know, the challenge with access to services is there aren't, you know, even in a place like Toronto where, you know, Black population makes up at least 10 to 11% of the population. A couple of years ago it was 9, so I'm rounding up. There isn't the access to the culturally responsive services that that we would anticipate or that we actually need, right? So yeah, I think one half of that answer is, you know, and I think we hear this a lot, but like we really do need to create more spaces, peer-to-peer spaces where men can share and engage, not only just when they're, you know, facing an issue, but just safer spaces where, you know, men can share and engage. And I think that's a critical piece and a critical tool. The second half of this the piece is back to the culturally appropriate services. So, you know, in honestly, so there if you have the dollars, there's a lot of therapists out there. There's a, you know, Black therapist list. You can Google Black therapist list. Social worker by the name of Lauren created a kind of like a repository for different counselors and psychologists, etc., with different skill sets that you can kind of go through and try and find the best fit for you. The challenge becomes when you don't have the dollars to go in and see somebody to get that, you know, one-on-one kind of help. It becomes very, very difficult, you know. And, you know, I think the advice that I I would give to people, particularly for folks who are, you know, in a moment of crisis, is you know, sometimes we find that folks will wait until like the very last moment because they're not getting what they want or because they don't trust the specific provider. I would encourage folks to try and get any kind of support that you can, you know, because, you know, what some of the stats show is that, you know, we face twice the delay of getting to evidence-based services than other parts of the community, and that leads to like us getting to care through the most aversive pathways. So police, ambulance, emergency room, and that's the most terrible way to start to get to services.
Yeah, that's pretty daunting when you kind of think about it, right? Because I mean, when you get to that point, it's almost like you're in you know, a recovery mode, right? It's not even like you're past reactive. You're in recovery mode at that point in time. So Simone, you know, question for you. You know, what advice would you give to Black men who are listening or may just sort of be connected to get in touch with their mental health?
Yeah, I think the first part is just education. So if you, whether it's reading more books or exposing yourself to social media platforms or whatever the case is, I think the first step is education and exposing yourself to that knowledge. And then whether the next step is seeking out professional help or whatever, I think at least having the education accessible is really important. And starting to identify within yourself the feelings that you have, starting to notice, okay, when is it that I feel happy? When is it that I feel maybe sad? What situations kind of elicit different emotions for me? And when I'm not feeling great, how can I manage that and what works best for me?
That's great. And you know, I'm going to kind of shift a little bit now and, you know, invite one of our brothers who is a special guest, Lasburn, to join us. And
I had no
I see
idea you did that
Laz.
for wow.
All right, I'm here. I'm here.
Welcome.
How you doing?
I see some people know some people on screen. Laz, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Great to be a part of this discussion.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, I see the nice exterior in the background. Seems like you're just sitting outside and enjoying some of the sun.
Oh, you know what? Give me an opportunity to be out here. This is where I am. I purposely make myself be out here, whether it's watching a program, doing some gardening, attending to my fish tank, fish pond. It doesn't matter. Give me a reason. I'm out here.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Laz, why don't you introduce yourself for the people?
Okay. So, you want what I do? Part of it. Okay,
You know,
I'll give you
give me the elevator pitch.
All right, the elevator pitch. Okay, so name is Lasburn Gordon. I've been involved. My life's work is with counseling. I work with the school board. I work with youth, especially. Mental health is something that I constantly am involved with. Trying to shift the way of thinking, shifting perspectives, helping them to kind of gain a rather optimistic view of life because of the negativity that sometimes it's easy to grab hold of. So what I do, that's part and parcel is what I do. Myself, I'm just an easygoing person. I enjoy trying to live and walk the walk as best as I possibly can. Wherever I fall, I try to get myself back up and continue that walk.
That's amazing, man. So, you know, I know you're kind of saying you're just this and just that, but you know, you're a game changer in my eyes, you know, and you know, so I'm going to pop a question to you and, you know, and feel free to sort of just jump in the conversation and pose questions to Simone and Paul too. But, you know, tell us about what you've been doing during the pandemic to take care of yourself and your family.
Prior to the pandemic, you know, working on one's mental health and just being tuned to what's happening in your environment. That's something that I was always on that journey. This pandemic just allowed me to really magnify that. I find that if it is that you had a lot of surface things that you were doing to cope with your situations, i.e. the malls, i.e. going out, i.e. all of the other things that are out there, this pandemic really, you know, shifted us to be with, you know, in terms of relationships. How do you manage in those relationships? Are you on that emotional intelligence level? Are you even aware of some of those things that, you know, for example, if my wife is, you know, I walk inside my house and I see my wife for whatever reason is in a space where she doesn't look right. She doesn't look like the way I normally would have seen her. And I ask the question and I might say, hey, you know, what's going on? He says nothing. All right. So in my head, all right, nothing. But that nothing doesn't really mean nothing. So at that point, I may ask again. And if she says nothing, but I know something is wrong. In that moment, I have two decisions. I could either decide to myself that I'm going to go into my closed door space because she's gone there, right? I could have decided that now we're two shifts passing in the night because she's not talking and I'm not talking. Both our mental health is being challenged at this point. However, if I was to be able to say, all right, hun, you know what? Something is obviously happening with you right now. And obviously you're not ready to talk about this conversation or have this conversation. But I'm letting you know that when you're ready, I'm good and ready. And force myself to be in that space. If I got to make a sandwich, do you like tomato on yours? I'm preparing one for you as well. So those are protective factors of how you deal with things as they come up. And believe me, how those situations ultimately, because now you're in a pandemic situation where you got to be in front of each other on a regular basis. That's where it becomes a powder keg for other things to happen based on how you are dealing with it.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I love that perspective around kind of shifting that mindset, right? So so part of mental health is shifting the mindset, and maybe those are some of the personal coping strategies that we could use, right? And we've been talking about the different toolbox. I don't know if Paul or Simone, you have anything to sort of to add to that perspective that Laz just shared.
No, the only thing I have to add is I do really love the way that you said that, and I love your explanation of the way that you manage your emotions as well as respecting your partners.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Here's the thing. I would challenge anyone. I mean, we're faced with emotions on a regular basis, up to 27 different emotions in the space of 1 hour. And oftentimes those emotions are lying to you until you investigate them. And we don't spend enough time investigating them. So we get hijacked by our own emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And, so when you get hijacked, then, reason doesn't have nothing to do with this right now. And when reason doesn't have nothing to do with it, emotion says, hey, I got this. No. I don't want to hear nothing about reason. I want to deal with it. And so, unless you are purposely, intentionally going on this quest, there's a lot of traps that's going to come your way.
That's beautiful, man. Well said. Well said. On the piece of emotions, right? There's this whole, when you talk about sort of the interaction, with your wife, and this is a question for any one of you guys to answer. But there is that piece of shifting mindset to put yourself in that person's shoes, right? And demonstrating a certain level of empathy. So what's your perspective, or share with us why it's important to demonstrate empathy and why that's good for mental health?
I mean,
well,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
And I don't want to hog the panel at all. I want to allow everyone to speak. But, sir, for me, why it's important, your quality of
in and out
life.
for some reason there.
Sorry, I'm losing.
Yeah.
Losing you guys?
And so, while
I hope not.
While Laz is kind of connecting.
Hey there, Dave.
Yeah, could hear you now.
Am I good?
So, yeah, you're good. You're good. Please go ahead.
Hold on, I'm gonna go inside. I might have to go inside so that we get better connection. Good. Okay. Why it's so important? It's important because everything is hinged on that, based on your quality of life, irregardless of what you do out. Work, relationships are at the relationships. Essentially, I don't care how much money you make. I don't care how much acclamations you get. If you can't keep your space in a functioning state, you are looking at a life that is not filled with essentially any sense of quality, and it's difficult.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, Paul, would love your perspective on it, and then Simone also.
Yeah, I was thinking about how to answer the question, and kind of what I arrived to was a lot of some of the work that I'm doing right now is looking at young Black folks who are homeless or face housing insecurity, and one of the biggest reasons why those young folks end up in that situation is because of family breakdown. And I think, that family breakdown piece in some of the conversation is often like co-located with mental health distress of various different kinds of forms. So to bring it back to kind of the question around empathy, I think oftentimes you may be feeling something. It may be anxiety, right? And even from my own personal self, took me a while to understand that what I was feeling, tightness in my chest, a certain kind of response to certain things that were going on, took me a while to realize that this was anxiety and say, okay, yeah, name it that, right? The point that I'm trying to make is when you're facing things and you're in the context of family or in context of relationships, it's easy for things to kind of get blown out of proportion, or kind of we're miscommunicating across one another because we're not really taking an understanding of like what other folks are going through, and like you said, like putting ourselves in that person's shoe and kind of using that empathy approach to understand what that other person is feeling and kind of like hold space for that, so that you can kind of communicate and sort some of those issues out. And I think the point that I was trying to make at the beginning is that if we're not using empathy, if we're not recognizing what we're feeling and how we're responding to those things, as I said, these things can kind of hijack things. It can lead to bigger issues like family breakdown that leads to other issues. So it's important on the front end to really understand what these things are and make sure that we're including empathy in the toolbox. I'll leave it there.
True. I like that. Dropping empathy in the toolbox. Simone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that empathy is kind of at the basis of all of our relationships. And so it provides an ability to connect. And so that's why I think it's a really important skill to develop too, because you need to be able to sit with people in their uncomfortable emotions, sit with people in their pain and their suffering and their anxiety and their depression. And that's where empathy comes in, because it's easy to sit with someone when they're happy, when they're feeling great, but it's not easy to sit with someone, especially without trying to fix. It's not easy to sit with someone when they're feeling at their lowest. So I think it's kind of at the basis of connection from my perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I want to get to some questions from the audience, but one of the things, and I see Laz just trying to reconnect here. So, but one of the things that I want to touch on, Simone, and would love for you to sort of weigh in from a clinical perspective is Health Canada defined mental health as the capacity to feel, to think, to act in ways that enhances one's ability to enjoy life and deal with challenges, right? And that's how Health Canada defined mental health. But in contrast, a lot of people confuse mental health and mental disorder. And I'd love for you to provide some perspective on that, because I see some of the comments too that starts to blur those lines around where mental health stops and then mental disorder starts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when we talk about mental health or mental wellness, that's kind of your day-to-day well-being. Mental illness might be something that consistently impacts your mental health throughout, whether it's months or weeks or whatever the case is. And so if we think of, for example, depression, you might have days where you're not feeling good, where you don't want to get out of bed. And that might be an example where your mental health is not doing that well. But depression, which is more of a mental illness, that is characterized by weeks and months of that state. And so when we think of the difference between mental health or mental wellness and mental illness, it's more from my perspective about the consistency of symptoms, not just the occurrence of symptoms.
And I appreciate how you've eloquently guided my description of mental disorder to mental illness. I really appreciate that. So one of the things I guess maybe I'd love to talk about is, when we talk about the impact that this is all having on us and then on our children, right? What would you say would be some of the strategies for fathers out there to kind of say, this is how you deal with children, especially when you know that your mental health could impact those interactions and then how those children thereby act out themselves?
I mean, I think that, and we talked a little bit about this kind of in a different conversation, but I think a lot of it is about the repair aspect of it. And so absolutely parents go through their ups and downs. They go through periods of feeling great with their mental health and feelings of not feeling great with their mental health. And so I really think that if something does happen where, you know, there's a blow up or you get really angry and you snap or whatever the case might be, that you focus on the repair and talking to them about, okay, this is what happened here, and this is what dad or this is what mom was feeling, and you know, yelling at you wasn't right, and this is what I'm going to do next time, and I apologize, so that kids don't grow up to think that that kind of treatment is normal or that kind of treatment is okay in other relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Laz, you have a perspective on that? Laz? Or Paul? Anybody want to?
I don't know that I have much to add to that, but you know, I think back to the piece around instability. You know, things can get off the rails at times, and I think it's important, as someone was saying, that piece around repair. But you know, recognizing that some of these situations, depending on how they play out, can have a really profound impact on children and their well-being, and different children respond differently to different things. So I think, you know, those age-appropriate tools again, or those. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear it. We're good.
I was saying that those age-appropriate tools, those you know, other adults in young folks' life that they can go to and talk to and process, so that they can understand. Sometimes I think it's not so much that you know, sometimes that you need to shield your children from all things bad in the world, or shield them from all the instability, but it's again, like, you know, what are the tools that folks, you know, including young children, are given to support, you know, in their processing, and you know, what are the different ways that we can you know, make sure that families are equipped to do that.
That's awesome, man. Love that. So listen, we got like 5 minutes, and I'd like to sort of just wrap it up and maybe just do a round table. You know, maybe each of you, you know, starting with Simone, could just kind of say, hey, what's one wish that you have for mental health and the Black community that you'd like to share?
I think my one wish would just be overall accessibility and destigmatization. I think that both of those kind of go hand in hand, but I think that there definitely needs to be more accessibility to mental health services, because in Alberta, at least, there's quite a few free mental health services, but a lot of times the wait list for that can be really expensive, and then private is definitely on the more expensive side. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. I think you're a little bit delayed. Connection is kind of dropping a little. So while we're waiting for you to kind of connect, Laz, Paul, your one wish.
What, Simone, were you done your one wish?
Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
I think I don't have one wish. I can't have one wish, right? So I think there's so many, again, factors that I said threaten the health and well-being, the mental health of Black men, and threaten the mental well-being of Black families. You know, poverty. You know, all kinds of structural kinds of factors. Access to care, etc. So, you know, what gives me hope, and perhaps what my you know, some of my wishes are, is that all of the folks that are doing their great work, the Simones that are out there working on the ones with clients, the folks like yourself, Dave, who are pulling people together to, figure out how as a community respond and support, at a different level. The folks who are working on, how do we address these structural factors that are affecting Black community, I think are all part of the work that needs to happen, that we need to amplify, that we need to support to make sure that, families, Black men, Black children are and Black women are well. So, I'll leave that there. I think not one wish, but perhaps many hopes.
I love that. Laz, your wish or your hopes that you want to kind of share? You able to hear me? So and while you're doing that, listen, it's important for us to kind of keep this conversation going. And as we talked about and we raise awareness and we raise money for mental health, we're going to continue to have this conversation. We're going to continue to talk about it in different facets. And, my one wish is that persons come out and support this conversation and being able to have open conversations around this. Right, so I'd love for that to happen. Laz, are you live? You good to talk? Because we can't hear you. No, you're still kind of cutting out. We're kind of a minute before ending up. Any last words, Simone, Paul? I want to thank you so much for joining. For everything that you do, Simone, for everything that you do within the practice, leading the effort, breaking down barriers, opening up door for people of color, Paul, for everything that you do, for the community, identifying services, talking about just wellness in general, and just identifying where the need is and attacking the need and addressing it. That's just really beautiful and strong.
David, I think, Brothers Who Care is a powerful platform, and, as I said before, always committed to supporting and building it up. I think, again, it really takes a village to do the work that we're doing, and really takes a village, I think, to make sure that people are well all around. So thank you for the invite and the opportunity to participate, and just commendations on the work and the vision.
Great, man. Thank you. And for me, it's about how do I connect 1,000 Pauls to 1,000 Simones, and that's when we're going to start to make an impact.
I'm following the page now, so cool.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thanks everyone for joining. It's been fantastic. Look out for us again. We'll do it again next month.
All right. Peace.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.